We are entering a new chapter in the use of generative AI in the enterprise. In fact, all of 2024, it's going to be about taking pilots to production. And we're here to realize the promises that we've all been seeing across much of the experimentation, the incubation, the piloting we've been together doing through last year. But along the way, we've hit many bumps, and through the process, we've learned a lot. And today, I wanted to tee off a discussion that I think gives us a perspective from a practitioner right where the rubber meets the road. And we'll together reflect a little bit on where the frontiers are at right now and what's to come ahead on that intersection of AI and business. So I'm super delighted, as always, to bring to you a colleague, a friend, an entrepreneur, and a founder at Spark Beyond, which is a company that is focused on generative AI-based powered solutions for enterprises. We're not here to talk about Spark Beyond, but I'm super happy to welcome Sergey Davidovich. Sergey, welcome.
Hey, Sanjay, great to be here.
So you and I, Sergey, first met, I recall, many years ago in Tel Aviv. You've since moved to the Silicon Valley. But over the years, you and I have tracked the journey across artificial intelligence back then and now generative AI. And actually, at many times, by the way, we've looked at it from differing, perhaps even opposing perspectives. And so what I wanted to do today was, together with you, maybe get a different perspective into it, but really track the learnings we've had so far, and then explore the challenges we're now seeing and a few ideas to go forward. And so really just to get us started, I'm actually going to pass the mic to you figuratively. And I'll say this, Sergey, large language models have been around for over a year now. What have you learned so far?
Yeah, so I think that's a very good place to start, right? Despite the fact that LLMs and generative AI in general has been in the works for the last 5 years or so, but we've seen this Cambrian explosion that started in November 23, right?
Cambrian explosion is the right word, actually. That's right.
Yeah, and following that moment, everyone's imagination was sparkled, and we've seen many different experiments running, many failures, many learnings. It's good to reflect on this a bit more than a year past.
And to be honest, a lot of hype, to be honest, a lot of promises that probably won't come through. And so it becomes very important to sort of segment what's real and what's hype.
Yeah, definitely. Some of the hype is actually justified. Maybe it's a bit premature, but people extrapolate naturally. And I think some of this is good because it fuels investments, it fuels investment in R&D, and some of this hype is being realized, sometimes a bit later than we would want. But indeed, there is also a lot of hype which is less justified.
Well, I think this was said by someone else, but the idea that in the short term, we often overestimate the impact of these technologies, but invariably in the long run, we underestimate that. And this is, I think, what's going to be happening with generative AI.
So true. Yeah. So if you think about several key milestones and learnings and try to summarize them, I would say that the first moment was when OpenAI revealed GPT 3.5 and then GPT 4. The perception was of an omnipotent AI. Not AGI yet, but people start to imagine, right, and extrapolate, and bring implementations into the enterprise. And that's where they actually start, when the rubber hits the road, they can start different landmines or failure points. The first one, of course, is of bias, right? And the bias is also a very, very human, right? Very, very natural trait that we have as humans. And as LLMs asymptotically converge to some of the cognitive capabilities that we have, they also accumulate biases, right? In a way, the more knowledgeable they are, the more biased they are.
And by the way, Sergey, we always think about bias as a negative word, but in a positive sense, the right bias actually helps us. It's the sort of thing that allows me to make good decisions in my, what the weather is outside, what I want to wear. I'm biased to wearing a warmer shirt today because I know it's going to be cold. So, we've always had so I think that's interesting you say that. But yes, so the journey so far, with LLMs coming out, number one, a number of discussions around the impact on society and humankind, on sentient, and all that other stuff that happened. And then I think there's discussion about ethics and making sure that gets placed properly. Let's keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Bias is, in a way, an evolutionary shortcut, right, for using a certain circuitry in our brain to react faster. And LLMs sort of imitate this process, right? If we think about type 1 and type 2 systems in our brain. Yeah, then the approaches today are primarily setting guardrails, which is very problematic, right? And we've seen some of the recent attempts and flops and the Gemini, right, with the image generation, etc. It's not easy. It's a hard problem, right?
And it's hard to be comprehensive, like to think through every single possibility and cover it up front.
It becomes fragile, and the more you add to the system message for setting the context, the more it actually starts crippling the cognitive and the intelligence capabilities, as we've seen with GPT-4, right? So it's a real issue. In addition to bias, we've seen many issues related to privacy, right? What should be sent to what third party, and now open source is still not on par, right? I believe that it will be on par with some of the proprietary LLMs. But now there is a very strong pressure to send data outside of the organization. Right.
But equally, Sergey, I'll say, look, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, we started with ethics, we started with the impact on society, we started thinking about security, we started thinking about accuracy. But in many ways, I think over the last year and a half, we've successively solved that, haven't we? I mean, we're in a much better place now than we were a year and a half ago. And so sorry, go ahead.
In a way, we see that both the Gen AI providers like OpenAI and Microsoft, right, with Azure, they've implemented all sorts of security measures. The companies, the policies in the companies have been, I would say, gone through a process of maturity, right, of maturization, and tools. There are tools that allow you to monitor and to control and to have a much better governance in the realm of Gen AI, which is very different than the kind of tools that were required in the traditional analytics context.
Good. Yeah, no, that's right. And I'm pleased with kind of the progress we've made. And I feel like we've kind of addressed many things with, retrieval augmented generation. We've put a lot of prompt engineering thinking. As you said, we've been able to firewall, manage a little bit of the security implications. But as we sit here today, and I'm talking about taking this promise to reality, right? We're still struggling with the next set of things. And you're right where the rubber meets the road. So what's the next challenge that we need to really crack?
Yeah. I would say that a very, very important area to put the spotlight on is what the LLM actually knows about the business, right? Because we are going to ask it different questions in different levels of granularity. It could be a single customer, a single event, or a much broader strategic decision that the business needs to make.
Okay, so wait a minute. So you're saying if an LLM is going to go trigger off of a body of knowledge, if you will, enterprise knowledge, to be able to respond to the questions you're asking, we have to make sure that that knowledge is comprehensive and complete so you get the right answers. Is that kind of what you're...
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
It's complete, it's up to date, it's accurate, it's quantifiable, right? And these are massive challenges that are not properly addressed today, right? And the best or maybe the least worst approach that we have is RAG, which basically says it's retrieval augmented generation, right? It says just bring some document, right, or a couple of documents or snippets from documents into the context of the LLM, and then ask it the same question so that it would not hallucinate about that, right? It would be more informed, or it would not just say, I don't know, right? These are all possible outcomes. This is sort of the best that can be done with this approach. But here's the challenge. What happens if there is no document in the organization or outside which actually has the critical bit of knowledge that's required to answer this question, right?
So you're saying, listen, I think what you're trying to get to is there's data that's hidden in many different places in the enterprise. They're not conveniently located in a PDF or some kind of document that you can actually quickly find and vector embed it into some model and then be able to get a RAG-enabled answer. And so if data is truly dispersed, if it's not as easily sort of harvestable, how do we solve for the problem of getting accurate responses? Is that...
Yeah, precisely, right? And if we illustrate on a real example, let's take Instacart, right? So it's an American company, right? They deliver groceries,
Right.
right? There's an app. And one of the interesting challenges in this space is of shopping cart abandonment, right?
Yeah.
Which is similar to customer engagement, churn. This is this class of problems, right? Of use
Right.
cases where you need to look very deeply into the transactions, the customer journey, right? The catalog of the products, and discover the patterns that actually tell you what's going on there, right? And I use the term discover because discover means that it's new knowledge. It's not something that common sense is enough for, right? And it's also not something where you already have a document in the organization, right? That in your knowledge base that has the answer, right? This is a massive blind spot for LLMs with or without reg.
So I think with that, I think what you're saying is, look, the shopping cart example is a fantastic one. That's a business problem we all face, or likes of that we all face. But actually, the solution to that problem lies in discovering a lot of information that sits across many different applications, whether it's this, warehouse or CRM or delivery and so on and so forth. And much of that data is actually sitting not in easily available PDFs and documents that you can just feed into a RAG model. And so truly to be able to get value from generative AI in the context of that one example, you somehow have to discover, use your word, discover the knowledge that sits across any other application in the enterprise, figure out whether it's relevant to the problem set we're trying to solve for, and bring it in. Is that?
Exactly, precisely, right? There is a new term that emerged over the last year, which is an agent, right? Versus an LLM. An agent is, in a way, an evolution or an extension of those systems, which gives it the ability to use tools, access additional information, or actually have an autonomous capability to run based on certain goals that are set, right? Where the LLM is in a way maybe the hypothalamus, but not the neocortex, right? So we need some of these, and also we need the senses, and we need actuators, right, to be able to perform in the real world. So let's imagine agents that operate on databases, right, including CRMs, ERP, IoT, system logs, right, transaction data, etc. And mine for new knowledge, and then stream and feed these into the LLMs.
Yeah, I think, this is amazing, right? Like, because in some ways you think about how the human brain works, and in many ways, each of our sensory inputs are picking a whole set of signals, and somehow they're able to figure out the noise from the signal and then present just the signal to the, I think you call it the cortex, and that kind of combines the right insights from different parts of the sensory mechanism to make a decision. And I think what you're saying is we got to replicate the same thing in an enterprise environment. Is that a decent analogy? Or?
Yes. Or another analogy is that the LLM is the brain, but we also need the scientist, right? The scientist that will constantly discover new knowledge and feed it into the brain so that the brain would not be just limited to what's written out there.
I love it. So listen, I know we are short on time. I think it's fantastic, just the progress we've had over the last year and a half. You've described very aptly all the challenges we've already overcome and put behind us. And yet, I think the next thing that comes to us is the fact that knowledge is dispersed, it's sitting in many different places, and only bits and pieces of it at the right place at the right time actually will help us make better decisions. You gave a great example of the shopping app. And I think what you're saying is maybe the next evolution is this notion of agents that sits in and keeps listening and uncovering and discovering data and information, and feeds it into the LLM at the right point for us to then make a much better, much more accurate, much more comprehensive decision.
Precisely.
Is that what's next?
Yeah, and in the context of our example, right, if we think about shopping cart abandonment for Instacart, what you can do with Reg is essentially, for example, review the catalog and the descriptions of the products, right, which could influence. This is actually a very legitimate application. But what you cannot discover is, for example, where the customer lives, right? If the customer lives close to a supermarket, does it influence it in any way? Right, you need these additional patterns and correlations in order to be much more intelligent and informed about this.
Excellent. Sergey, you're on my list of people. Next time I'm in the Bay Area, I want to see some of the work you're doing. Thank you for joining us today. What a great conversation, and so much ahead of us collectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay.